The alarm on my console screamed before I even understood what I was looking at. I am Kes Varnell, a cartographer of the Threll fleet, and in that moment, 300 years of star charts blinked red on my screen at once. Every navigator on the bridge froze. Administrator Doran Vey, who never raised his voice, was suddenly shouting for silence. "Someone tell me why the border is active," he said. "Someone tell me why, after 40 years, the border is active." I did not know what border he meant. I was 26 years old, freshly assigned to the survey ship Cathara, and I had spent my whole life staring at the most detailed star map in the galaxy without ever noticing what was missing from it. That was about to change, and it would change everything I believed about the universe I lived in. The bridge of the Cathara was shaped like a shallow bowl, with navigation stations curving around a central holographic display that showed our current position among the stars. I worked on the outer ring, updating minor star systems, correcting drift in old survey data, filling in gaps left by explorers decades before I was born. It was quiet work. It was supposed to be quiet work. That morning, the quiet ended. A signal had come in from deep space, from a region so far past our usual patrol routes that I had never once plotted a course near it. When Administrator Vey pulled up the source location on the main display, the entire bridge went still. The hologram showed our galaxy in soft blue light, stars scattered like dust across the dark, every system labeled, every trade route marked, every colony numbered and catalogued, except for one place. At the edge of the display, where the light of civilization should have continued, there was nothing, not black space, not unexplored territory, not even a question mark, just a smooth, empty curve, as if someone had taken a knife and cut a piece out of the galaxy itself. I had seen that empty curve 1,000 times before. I had assumed, like every cartographer before me, that it was simply an area no one had mapped yet, a gap waiting to be filled in. I had never questioned it, because questioning it had never once crossed my mind. It was just there, the way the edge of a page is there. You do not ask why a page has an edge. "Administrator," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, "what border?" Vey looked at me the way someone looks at a child who has asked what happens after you die, not annoyed, not unkind, just tired, in a way that told me this was a question he had hoped never to answer. "Get back to your station, Kes," he said quietly. I did not get back to my station. Something in me, some stubborn curiosity that had gotten me into trouble since I was small, made me stay rooted where I stood. "That empty region," I said, "it's not unmapped, is it? It's marked that way on purpose." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Nobody answered me. A junior officer named Rel, who sat 2 stations down from mine, gave me a small shake of his head, a silent warning to drop it. I did not drop it. "How long has that signal been silent?" I asked instead, hoping a different angle might get me an answer. This time, Vey did answer, though his voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of someone choosing every word like it might cost him something. 41 years, he said. Not a single transmission from that region in 41 years. Until 6 minutes ago. The hologram flickered, and a thin red line appeared at the edge of the empty curve, pulsing steadily, like something waking up after a very long sleep. I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ship. For the rest of that day, I could not stop thinking about the blank space on the map. I finished my shift in a daze, correcting star positions with hands that moved out of habit, while my mind stayed fixed on that smooth, deliberate emptiness. When my shift ended, I did something I had never done before. I went looking for old records. The Cathara had an archive deck, 3 levels below the bridge, where retired star charts were kept for historical reference. Nobody visited it often. Most navigators considered old maps useless once new data replaced them. But old maps, I was beginning to understand, could tell you something new maps could not. They could tell you what used to be there. I found a chart dated almost 50 years back, pulled it up on a reading terminal, and felt my breath catch. The region was not blank on this older chart. There were stars. There were system names, dozens of them, written in the careful formal script my people used for confirmed, verified locations, and laid directly across that region, in a different hand, in a different color, someone had written a single word in the old administrative language. Withdrawn. Not unexplored, not unmapped, withdrawn, as if the stars themselves had been recalled, like a product pulled from shelves, like a decision made and then enforced. I sat there for a long time, staring at that word, feeling the shape of a mystery form around me, the way fog forms around a ship at night, slow and quiet, and impossible to see the edges of. I brought the old chart to Rel the next day, hoping a friend might tell me what a superior officer would not. Rel was older than me by a decade, had served on 3 different survey ships, and had a reputation for knowing things other people did not bother to learn. He looked at the chart for a long moment before pushing it back across the table to me, refusing to touch it further. "Where did you find this?" he said. It was not really a question. "Archive deck. It's not restricted. Anyone could look at it." "Anyone could," Rel agreed, "but nobody does. There's a difference between something being allowed and something being wanted." He glanced around the mess hall before leaning in closer. "Kess, listen to me. That word on the chart, withdrawn, that's not a mapping term. We don't use it for star systems. We use it for treaties, for agreements, for things 2 sides decide together and then never speak of again." "An agreement with who?" Rel's jaw tightened. "I don't know the details. Nobody my age does. This happened before either of us were born. All I know is that every species in the Alliance treats that region the same way. The Threll don't go there. The Corvain don't go there. Even the Ilith, who fly wherever the wind takes them and answer to no one, stay away from that border. That kind of agreement, held by every species at once, without a single written law forcing it, that doesn't happen by accident. Something made everyone agree, something big enough that nobody wanted to risk finding out twice." "Twice," I repeated. "You think something happened there once already?" Rel did not answer that directly. Instead, he said something that stayed with me for the rest of that week, turning over and over in my mind like a stone I could not put down. "There's an old story," he said, "that my grandmother used to tell. Back before she passed, she called it the Silence. Not a war, not exactly, something quieter than a war, but somehow worse. She said her own grandmother had lived through it, back when the border first went dark. She never told me what happened inside that region. She said the not knowing was the point. She said some doors, once you close them, you're supposed to leave closed." "That's not an answer," I said. "No," Rel agreed. "It isn't. That should have been the end of it." I told myself more than once over the following days that I should let the matter rest, that Administrator Vey clearly did not want it discussed, that whatever lived behind that word withdrawn had stayed quiet for 41 years and would likely stay quiet for 41 more. But the signal did not stay quiet. 3 days after the first alarm, Vey called the senior staff into a meeting room I had never been invited to before. To my surprise, my name was on the list. I arrived early, nervous in a way that made my hands feel too large for my body. The room was small, windowless, built for confidential briefings rather than open discussion. Vey stood at the head of a narrow table, and beside him stood someone I did not recognize, wearing the deep violet robes of the Alliance Diplomatic Corps. An ambassador. I had never seen one in person before. "This is Ambassador Sella Kryn," Vey said, once the room had filled. "She has been assigned a mission of considerable importance, and the Cathara has been chosen to carry her." I already knew somehow, before he said the words, exactly where that mission would take us. "We are going to the border," Vey continued, confirming what I feared. "The region designated as withdrawn on our older charts. For the first time in 41 years, we have received a direct communication from within that space, requesting formal contact. The Alliance Council has decided the request cannot be ignored." Nobody in the room spoke. I could feel the tension pressing against the walls, thick enough to touch. "I want to be honest with all of you," Vey said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "I do not know exactly what we will find there. I was a child when the border closed. Most of what I know comes from records that were never meant to be widely shared, and even those records are incomplete. What I do know is this: whatever caused that region to be withdrawn, it was not a decision made lightly, and it was not a decision made by us alone. Whoever, or whatever, lives on the other side of that border agreed to it as well. Then why send us now? Someone asked from the back of the room. Why open it after 41 years of silence? Vey's eyes moved briefly to Ambassador Kryn before he answered. Because they asked us to, he said, not the other way around. That single sentence did more to frighten me than anything else in that entire meeting. I had assumed, without ever quite admitting it to myself, that whatever lived beyond that empty space on the map had been sealed away because we feared it, because it was dangerous, because it needed to be contained. But if they had reached out to us, if the request had come from their side and not ours, then the shape of the mystery shifted into something stranger. It meant the silence had not been forced on them. It meant, somehow, that the silence had been their choice as much as ours. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my narrow bunk aboard the Cathara, staring at the ceiling, replaying that old word from the archive chart over and over in my mind. Withdrawn, not destroyed, not defeated, withdrawn, like something powerful enough to walk away from a fight on its own terms and never look back. In the morning, the Cathara changed course. I stood at my station on the bridge as the navigation computer plotted a new heading, one that curved directly toward that smooth, empty edge of the galaxy map, the edge that had sat quietly at the border of my entire world for as long as I had been alive, without me ever once asking why it was there. Rel found me there, staring at the display, watching the little marker that represented our ship inch closer and closer to the blank space with every passing hour. Still curious? He asked, though there was no teasing in his voice this time, only concern. Terrified, I admitted, but yes, still curious. He nodded slowly, as if that answer did not surprise him at all. Good, he said, because whatever we're about to find out there, Kess, I think it's about to become very hard to unknow. Behind us, on the main display, the empty curve of the map continued to pulse with that same thin red line, patient and steady, like something that had been waiting a very long time to be seen again. I did not look away from it for the rest of my shift. The Cathara reached the border 6 days later, and by then I had learned enough fragments of the old story to fill a notebook, though none of the fragments fit together the way I wanted them to. I spent most of those 6 days in the archive deck, digging through records that had not been opened in decades. Ambassador Kryn noticed. She found me there on the 3rd night, surrounded by old data slates, and instead of sending me away, she sat down across from me and asked what I had found. Not much, I admitted. Pieces, a word here, a redacted line there. Enough to know something happened, not enough to know what. That is usually how history works, when the people who lived it decide it should stay buried, she said. She had a calm, measured way of speaking, the voice of someone trained to choose words as carefully as a surgeon chooses where to cut. Would you like to know what I know, Kess Varnal? I nearly dropped the data slate in my hands. You would tell me. I am going to need cartographers who understand what we are walking into, she said. A frightened crew makes mistakes. An informed crew, even a frightened one, does not. Besides, she added, with the faintest trace of a smile, you would find out eventually. You strike me as someone who does not stop pulling a thread once she has found the end of it. She was right about that, though I did not say so. Ambassador Kryn told me the story slowly, the way you tell a story to someone you are worried might not be ready to hear it. She told me that roughly 90 years ago, before either of us had been born, the alliance had been much smaller than it is today. Only a handful of species had joined together under a shared council, still cautious of one another, still learning how to share the stars without conflict. During that period, Alliance survey ships pushed steadily outward, mapping new systems, searching for resources and habitable worlds, doing exactly what my own ship did every day without much thought. One of those survey ships, according to the records Kryn had access to, made contact with a species none of the Alliance founders had ever encountered before. They called themselves humans, Kryn said, a young species by our standards. Barely out into the stars themselves, still confined mostly to a single system, still learning what was out there waiting for them. What happened? I asked. The survey team did what survey teams did in that era, Kryn said. They observed, they cataloged, and then, believing the humans too primitive to pose any threat and too valuable a resource to simply leave alone, a faction within that early survey mission attempted something they should never have attempted. She did not describe exactly what that attempt involved, and something in the careful way she avoided the detail told me I should not press her on it. I understood, without being told directly, that it was not something spoken of kindly in any record, alliance or otherwise. It went badly, Kryn continued, very badly, not because the humans had greater numbers or greater technology at that time. They did not. What they had was a response so swift and so absolute that within a matter of months, the faction responsible no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Ships, stations, entire chains of command, gone, not through some overwhelming weapon we could point to and study and defend against, through something closer to precision, like a surgeon removing exactly the tissue that had caused the infection and leaving everything around it untouched. I sat with that for a long moment, trying to understand the shape of what she was describing. But the Alliance survived, I said. The Alliance still exists. If this species could do that to us so easily, why are we still here? That, Kryn said, is the part of the story almost no one alive remembers correctly, because almost no one who witnessed it firsthand is still alive to tell it. What happened next was not another attack. It was a message. She reached into the satchel she carried and produced an old data crystal, worn smooth with age, the kind of storage device my people had not used in decades. She placed it on the table between us but did not activate it. After the incident, the humans did not pursue the rest of the Alliance. They did not demand tribute, or territory, or apology. They sent a single formal communication to the Alliance Council of that era, and then they withdrew entirely, behind a border of their own choosing, cutting off contact, requesting that the Alliance do the same. They asked that their systems be removed from all shared star charts. They asked that no Alliance vessel cross into their space again unless invited. Why would they ask for that? I said. If they had the power to do what you're describing, why hide themselves away instead of using that power? Kryn's expression, for the first time since I had met her, showed something that looked almost like sadness. Because they understood what they had just shown us, she said quietly, and they did not want to be feared for it. According to the message, which I have read myself, they believed that if the rest of the Alliance saw what they were capable of on a regular basis, saw their strength paraded across the same star charts everyone else used, they would never be seen as anything else. Not as scientists, not as artists, not as neighbors. Only as the thing capable of ending a faction in a matter of months. So instead of proving that strength again and again, they chose to disappear. They redrew the boundaries of the known galaxy themselves, and they gave the Alliance the choice to forget they existed at all. I thought about the word on the old chart, withdrawn. That's not a defeat, I said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces. That's not us keeping them out. That word wasn't written about them. It was written by them, wasn't it? They withdrew themselves. Yes, Kryn said, and the Alliance Council of that era, ashamed of what the original faction had done, and frightened of what might happen if any future generation made the same mistake, agreed to the arrangement completely. Every founding species signed it. Every species that has joined the Alliance since has been quietly asked to honor it, without always being told the full reason why. That is why you have grown up your entire life beside an empty space on a map, Kess, and never once thought to ask what filled it. That was precisely the intention. I did not know what to say to that. I sat there with the ambassador's data crystal on the table between us, unopened, and felt something shift permanently in the way I understood my own galaxy. Then why now? I finally asked. After 90 years of silence, why would they reach out to us at all? What changed? Kryn's hand rested lightly on the data crystal, though she still did not activate it. That, she admitted, is the part I do not fully know myself. Their message was brief. It requested a diplomatic meeting at the border, under conditions they specified themselves, and it asked for representatives from every Alliance species currently active in this sector. It did not explain why. My task, and yours, is to find out. That night, alone in my bunk, I finally allowed myself to activate the data crystal Kryn had left with me, against her instruction to wait until we reached the border itself. I told myself it was simple curiosity, the same stubborn habit that had gotten me into every difficulty I had ever found myself in. In truth, I think I simply could not bear the idea of walking into that meeting without understanding, as fully as I could, exactly what kind of neighbor had been sleeping quietly at the edge of my world my entire life. The crystal held a single recording, badly degraded by decades of storage, the audio thin and crackling, layered with static that made portions of it impossible to understand. It was, I realized as I listened, the original message the humans had sent to the Alliance Council all those years ago. I could make out only fragments of the voice, a low, calm, unhurried tone that did not sound like the voice of a conqueror at all. Did not want this outcome. Regret the loss. This is not who we intend to be to you. We ask only for distance, not silence forever. A door closed is not a door destroyed. The recording ended there, cutting off into static, the rest of the message lost to time or corruption, or perhaps simply never recorded in full. I lay awake for a long time afterward, turning that voice over in my mind, trying to reconcile it with the story Kryn had told me. A species capable of ending an entire faction within months, and yet a voice that sounded, more than anything else, tired, sad, careful. A door closed is not a door destroyed. I thought about that sentence for the rest of the journey. 2 days before we reached the border, Rel found me in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars with my notebook of fragments open on my lap, though I had stopped writing in it hours earlier. "You look like someone who wishes she never opened that archive terminal," he said, settling into the seat beside me. "I don't," I said, and found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I meant it. I think I would rather know something difficult than not know something important, even if the knowing is heavy. Rel was quiet for a moment, watching the stars slide past the viewport. "My grandmother used to say something like that," he said eventually, "about the silence. She said the ones who forgot on purpose were not being kind to themselves. She said forgetting a mistake does not undo it, it only makes sure you're not prepared the next time you're tempted to make it again." "Do you think that's what's happening?" I asked. "Do you think someone, somewhere, was tempted to make the same mistake again? Is that why the border woke up?" Rel did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual easy humor. "I don't know, Kess," he said, "but I know that whoever sent that first message 90 years ago chose to disappear instead of proving how strong they were. I know that takes a particular kind of restraint most species I have studied do not have, ourselves included, and I know that if something has changed enough, after 90 years, to make them break that silence and reach out first, it is probably not a small thing." I looked back out at the stars, at the empty curve on the horizon of our sensors where the map still showed nothing, though I now knew that nothing had never truly been empty at all. "2 more days," I said quietly. "2 more days," Rel agreed. "And then we finally get to see what's actually there." Neither of us said anything else for a long while. We simply sat together in the observation lounge, watching the dark space ahead of us, waiting for the moment when the blank edge of the galaxy map would finally, after 90 years, be filled back in. The sensors began behaving strangely, almost an hour before we reached the border itself, and that was the first sign that everything I thought I understood about this crossing was about to prove smaller than the reality. I was at my station when the readings started drifting, small at first, then larger, Distance calculations that should have been stable suddenly disagreed with themselves by fractions of a percent. Star positions that had not moved in centuries appeared to shift, then settle, then shift again. I checked my equipment twice, certain something on our end had failed. "It's not you," Rel said from beside me, watching his own display do the same thing. "It's them. Some kind of field, I think. A boundary marker, maybe, or something meant to make anyone approaching slow down and pay attention." Administrator Vey's voice carried across the bridge, steady despite the tension I could hear underneath it. "Reduce speed to 1/4. Nobody touches anything they don't have to. We are guests here, and guests do not rush through a door before it's opened for them." The Cathara slowed. On the main display, the smooth blank curve that had haunted the edge of every map I had ever studied grew larger and larger, until it filled almost the entire screen, and I felt something tighten in my chest that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, but some new feeling made from both at once. Then, almost gently, without any dramatic flash or violent surge of energy, the emptiness in front of us simply began to fill in. Stars appeared. Not new stars, I understood, only stars that had always been there, finally allowed to be seen again. System after system bloomed into existence on our display, as our sensors, for the first time in 90 years, were permitted past whatever quiet barrier had kept them blind. I heard someone on the bridge gasp. I think it might have been me. It was, in its own way, one of the most beautiful things I had ever witnessed. An entire section of the galaxy, hidden for the length of a human generation, revealing itself all at once, star by star, like a held breath finally released. "Signal detected," announced the communications officer, her voice tight. "Directional. Source confirmed. They're waiting for us." A voice came through the Cathara's comm system a moment later, calm, unhurried, and entirely unlike anything I had braced myself to hear. I had expected, without fully admitting it to myself, something cold, something clipped, and businesslike, the voice of a species that did not need to waste effort being warm toward strangers. Instead, the voice that greeted us sounded almost like an old friend welcoming visitors to a home they had not seen in a long time. "Cathara, this is Outpost Station Aldergate. We have you on approach. Please hold your current heading. We'll guide you the rest of the way in. It's good to finally see you on our screens." Administrator Vey exchanged a glance with Ambassador Kryn before responding himself. "Aldergate, this is the Cathara, representing the Alliance delegation. We appreciate the welcome. We are not entirely certain what to expect." There was a short pause, and when the voice returned, I thought I could hear the faint trace of a smile in it, though I could not have explained how a voice could carry such a thing. "That's all right," the voice said. "Most people aren't. Come on in. Nobody's going to bite." The outpost station Aldergate came into view an hour later, and it was, to my quiet surprise, unremarkable. Not small, not primitive, but not the towering fortress of intimidation I had half expected either. It looked, more than anything, like a well-kept research station, lights glowing warm along its hull, a handful of smaller vessels docked or drifting nearby, going about tasks that looked entirely ordinary, cargo transfers, maintenance drones, a ship departing for reasons that had nothing to do with our arrival at all. I do not know exactly what I had pictured, all those days of imagining what lay behind the blank space on our maps, but it had not been this. It had not been ordinary. We docked without incident, and the delegation, myself included at Ambassador Kryn's insistence, made our way through the connecting corridor into the station itself. My hearts, and I do have more than one, were pounding hard enough that I worried the humans might somehow hear it. The human waiting to greet us at the airlock was tall, though I had no real frame of reference yet for what counted as tall among his species, with dark hair beginning to gray at the temples and an expression of open, unguarded interest that I had not prepared myself for at all. He wore a simple uniform, unadorned by the kind of ceremonial decoration our own diplomatic corps favored, and he extended a hand toward Ambassador Kryn in a gesture I did not understand until Kryn, apparently briefed on human customs beforehand, took it and shook it once. "Ambassador Kryn," he said, "I'm Daniel Marsh, station coordinator here at Aldergate. Thank you for making the journey. I know it can't have been an easy decision on your end." "Coordinator Marsh," Kryn replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I confess we do not entirely understand why the decision needed to be made at all, after so long a silence. But we are here, as requested." Marsh's expression flickered, something complicated passing behind his eyes too quickly for me to fully read. "I understand the confusion," he said. "We'll get to that. First, please, come inside properly. You've had a long trip, and there's no reason to have this conversation standing in a doorway." As we walked deeper into the station, I found myself watching Daniel Marsh more closely than I probably should have, cataloging him the way I cataloged star systems, trying to fit what I saw against what I had been told. He walked slowly, deliberately, at a pace that seemed almost designed to avoid startling us, though nothing about him suggested he needed to move any faster than that to keep pace with even the quickest members of our delegation. He held doors open a fraction longer than necessary. He kept a careful, comfortable distance, never crowding, never looming, the way you might behave around an animal you did not want to frighten, not out of danger to yourself, but out of concern for the animal. It took me longer than it should have to understand what I was seeing. It was not caution born of fear. It was restraint, practiced so long it had become simple habit. I mentioned this observation quietly to Rel as we walked, and he nodded slowly, having apparently noticed the same thing. "Like something big, trying very hard to move gently," he murmured. "You don't learn to move like that unless you've had to think about it for a long time." We were led into a wide meeting room with windows looking out over the docked ships and the newly visible stars beyond, and it was there, over what Marsh called refreshments, simple food and drink laid out with no particular ceremony, that the conversation truly began. "I imagine you have questions," Marsh said, settling into a chair across the table from Ambassador Kryn. 90 years of questions, probably. I'll answer what I can. Some of it, I think, will be easier coming from someone who actually lived through part of it, rather than a diplomatic summary written by a committee." "We would appreciate that," Kryn said carefully. "Though I confess, Coordinator, my first question is simpler than the history. Why now? Why, after 90 years of maintaining this silence so completely, would your people choose to break it?" Marsh was quiet for a moment, his hands wrapped around a cup he had not yet drunk from. "Because something is coming," he said finally, "that we don't think we can handle quietly this time, not the way we handled things before." The room went very still. "Handled things quietly," Kryn repeated. "You mean the incident? The one that led to your withdrawal?" Marsh's eyes moved briefly toward me, then back to Kryn, and something in his expression made me feel, for the first time since arriving, genuinely unsettled. "You know about that then," he said. It was not quite a question. "Good. That saves us a difficult conversation. Then you'll understand why what I'm about to tell you concerns us as much as it should concern you." He set his cup down without drinking from it. 90 years ago, we made a choice to disappear rather than be seen as a threat," he said. "We built that border ourselves, and we have kept it ourselves, because we believed, and still believe, that a species should not have to live in fear of its neighbors simply because those neighbors are capable of terrible things when provoked. We wanted to be known, if we were known at all, for something better than that. So we withdrew, and we watched from a distance, and we let the rest of the galaxy grow and change without us." "And now?" Kryn asked quietly. Marsh looked past her, out the window, toward the stars that had only just become visible to us again after 90 long years of careful, deliberate silence. "Now, something has entered this region that isn't us, and isn't you," he said. "Something that crossed into what used to be our quiet, empty corner of the map, precisely because it was empty, because whatever it is, it was counting on nobody watching closely enough to notice." He turned back to face the delegation, and for the first time since we had met him, Daniel Marsh looked less like a careful host and more like a man carrying a weight he had been holding alone for far too long. "We've been watching it for 6 months," he said, "and we don't think we can keep watching it alone." Nobody spoke for a long moment after Daniel Marsh said the words "something we don't think we can keep watching alone," and in that silence I found myself thinking, strangely, not about the unknown threat he had just described, but about the voice on that old data crystal, tired and careful, promising a door closed is not a door destroyed. I understood now, sitting in that quiet meeting room, exactly how much weight that promise had been carrying for 90 years. "Before we speak of what has entered this region," Ambassador Kryn said carefully, "I think it would help all of us, Coordinator, if we understood fully what happened the first time. Not summaries, not committee reports. I would like to hear it from someone who was there, if such a person still lives among you." Marsh nodded slowly, as though he had expected this request and had already decided how he wanted to answer it. "There is someone," he said. "My grandmother's sister. She was young then, barely more than a girl, but she remembers it clearly, and she has spent most of her long life making sure the rest of us remember it correctly too, rather than the way it gets told in old stories. Her name is Grace Feld. She still lives here on Aldergate. I can bring her, if you're willing to wait an hour." Kryn agreed, and while we waited, Marsh walked us through the station itself, showing us laboratories, living quarters, a school where human children studied alongside images of stars they had never been permitted to visit. Everywhere I looked, I searched for some sign of the frightening power that had ended an entire faction within months, some visible proof of teeth behind the gentle welcome, and found instead only the ordinary rhythms of people going about ordinary lives. I asked Marsh, quietly, as we walked, whether the station carried significant defenses, expecting the question to be deflected the way such questions often were among cautious diplomats. He answered honestly instead. "Some," he said. "Enough to protect the people who live here from most ordinary dangers, but nothing close to what ended that faction 90 years ago, if that's what you're asking. That capability doesn't live here, on a research outpost. It lives much further in, closer to our core worlds, and it stays there deliberately. We do not bring it out for small things. We have made a point, for 90 years, of never bringing it out for small things." "Then what changed?" I asked, before I could stop myself, forgetting my place among the senior delegates in my eagerness for an answer. Marsh did not seem to mind the question, or perhaps he simply did not notice the breach of protocol. "You'll understand soon," he said. "I promise." Grace Feld arrived an hour later, exactly as Marsh had said. She was old, by human standards, her hair entirely silver, her hands marked with the kind of fine lines that come from a very long life, but her eyes were sharp and steady, and when she sat down across from Ambassador Kryn, she did not hesitate for even a moment before beginning to speak, as though she had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally ask. "I was 19, she said, "when the survey ships came. We didn't know what they were at first. We thought, some of us, that they might be some new kind of weather phenomenon, strange lights that didn't behave the way lights should. It took months before we understood we were being watched by something that was not us." She spoke slowly, without embellishment, the practiced calm of someone who had told this story many times before and had long ago worn away whatever rawness it once carried. "When contact finally came, it did not come gently," she said. "A faction within that early survey fleet, believing us too primitive to matter and too valuable to leave untouched, attempted to take resources from one of our settlements by force. Not through negotiation, not through any offer we could have accepted or refused. Through force, aimed at people who did not understand, at the time, that such force was even possible." Canquate. I felt the room grow colder, though nothing about the temperature had changed. "We did not have your technology then," Grace Feld continued. "We were, as your ambassador's records probably describe us, a young species barely out into the stars. But we were not a foolish species, and we were not a species without capability of our own, even if that capability had never before been tested against something from beyond our own solar system. What that faction did not understand, and what cost them everything, was that we do not respond to force upon our people with hesitation. We never have. It is, I think, both our greatest strength and our heaviest burden." She paused, folding her hands together on the table. "The response was swift," she said, "and it was thorough. I will not describe the details to you, young cartographer, and I would ask that you not press me for them. Some of what I remember from that time I have chosen to carry alone, so that others do not have to carry it with me." She looked at me directly as she said this, and I understood, without needing further explanation, that this was not a request I should refuse. What matters is the outcome. The faction responsible no longer existed, in any meaningful sense, within a matter of months, and once that was finished, our leaders faced a choice. "To press the advantage," Kryn said quietly, "or to withdraw." "Yes," Gracefeld agreed. "There were voices among us who argued we should use what had just been proven, that the rest of the Alliance should know exactly what we were capable of, so that no one would ever again mistake us for something to be taken from freely. And there were other voices, voices that won out in the end, who argued that a species known only for its strength would never be known for anything else. That fear makes a very poor foundation for friendship, and we did not want to spend the rest of our history being feared instead of known." "So you chose to disappear," I said. "We chose to give the rest of the galaxy the chance to forget us, rather than force it to remember us with dread." Gracefeld said, "We built our border, we sent our message, and we stepped back from a stage we had never asked to stand on in the first place. It was not an easy choice. There were those among us who never forgave it, who believed we surrendered a kind of standing among the stars that we had earned the hard way. But most of us, I think, in the years since, have come to believe it was the right one." The room sat in silence for a long moment after she finished. I found myself thinking of the voice on the data crystal again, that quiet, tired sentence. "This is not who we intend to be to you." "Thank you," Kryn said finally, her voice softer than I had heard it before. "I understand now why the border exists, and why it has held for so long. I understand the cost of what you are describing was not paid lightly, by you or by us. What I do not yet understand, Coordinator Marsh, is why that border is being opened now." Marsh exchanged a glance with Gracefeld, who nodded once, giving him some silent permission to continue. "6 months ago," Marsh said, "one of our deep sensor arrays detected an object entering this region from outside known space entirely, not from Alliance territory, and not from anywhere within our own charted systems, from somewhere further out, somewhere none of us, human or Alliance, have ever mapped." He activated a small display at the center of the table, and an image appeared, grainy and distant, of something moving slowly through the dark. It did not look like a ship in any sense I recognized. It had no clear hull, no visible engines, no lights. It moved with a strange, deliberate patience, like something that had all the time in the universe and no reason to hurry. "We do not know what it is," Marsh said. "We do not know where it came from, or what it wants, if it wants anything at all in a way we would recognize. What we do know is that it has been moving steadily closer to inhabited space for 6 months, adjusting its course with what our analysts believe is clear intelligence, and it has, twice now, passed directly through defensive positions we maintain along our own borders without triggering any response from our systems at all." "It's not being detected," Rel said quietly, understanding arriving in his voice a moment before it arrived in mine. "It's being detected," Marsh corrected gently. "It simply isn't being stopped, or slowed, or affected in any way by anything we've attempted so far, and we have attempted quite a lot, quietly, over these past 6 months, hoping we would not need to have this conversation with any of you at all." "Why come to us now, then?" Kryn asked. "If your own capabilities were sufficient to end an entire faction within months, 90 years ago, why do you need the Alliance's assistance against a single unidentified object?" Marsh's expression, for the first time since we had met him, showed something I could only describe as genuine fear, carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "Because whatever ended that faction 90 years ago worked, because we understood what we were fighting," he said. "It was a known force, using known methods, vulnerable to things we understood how to exploit. This is different. This object does not behave like anything we have encountered before, in 90 years of watching this region for exactly this kind of possibility. And 6 days ago, for the first time, it changed course, directly toward Aldergate, directly toward the very border we have spent 90 years keeping quiet and empty for precisely this reason. He looked around the table at each of us in turn, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost every trace of the calm, welcoming warmth he had greeted us with at the airlock. "We built this silence to protect the Alliance from us," he said. "We never imagined we might one day need to break it to protect the Alliance, and ourselves, from something neither of us understands. But that is exactly where we are now, and I am afraid, Ambassador, that we are running out of time to decide what we intend to do about it together." Outside the meeting room window, past the newly visible stars that had waited 90 years to be seen again, something vast and patient continued moving steadily closer through the dark, unhurried, unexplained, and utterly indifferent to the careful, fragile peace that two civilizations had spent nearly a century building between themselves in silence. The next 3 days aboard Aldergate passed faster than any 3 days I had ever lived through, and by the end of them, I understood that the story I had spent so long uncovering, the story of a hidden border and a silent species, was no longer the story that mattered most. A new one had begun, and this time, I was not simply reading it from an old data crystal, I was standing inside it. Joint sensor teams formed almost immediately, human and Alliance specialists working side by side in Aldergate's central observation deck, sharing data that had never once, in 90 years, crossed between our two peoples. I found myself assigned to the cartography team, working alongside a human analyst named Elena Voss, whose calm focus reminded me strongly of Ambassador Kryn, though her manner was far less formal. "You're the one who found the old chart," she said, the first time we worked a shift together, glancing at me sideways while her hands moved quickly across a display full of drifting sensor readings. "The one with the word withdrawn, written across our systems. You know about that?" I asked, surprised. "Marsh mentioned it," she said. "Said you were the reason the Alliance delegation understood the history before he even had to explain it properly. That's not nothing, Kess. Most people spend their whole lives standing next to a mystery and never once think to ask what it means." I did not know what to say to that, so I simply nodded and returned my attention to the display, where the unidentified object continued its slow, patient approach, now close enough that our combined sensor arrays could resolve considerably more detail than the grainy image Marsh had first shown us. What we found, over those 3 days, unsettled every single person working that deck, human and Alliance alike. The object was not a ship, not in any sense either of our peoples understood the term. It had no crew compartments, no propulsion systems we could identify, no weapons in any conventional sense. It appeared, instead, to be something closer to a vast, slow, deliberate structure, built from material our scanners struggled to classify at all, absorbing nearly every form of energy we directed at it for study, and reflecting almost nothing back. "It's not attacking," Elena said, on the second day, staring at the readings with a furrowed brow. "It's not defending either, it's just moving, steadily, like it has somewhere specific it intends to be, and nothing we do changes that intention even slightly." "Where?" I asked. "Where is it going?" Elena pulled up a projected course, extrapolated from 6 months of steady, unbroken movement, and traced a line with one finger across the display, a line that curved directly through the newly reopened border, directly toward Aldergate itself, and beyond it, toward the more populated systems further into human space. "Here," she said quietly. "It's going to pass directly through this station in 11 days, whether we do anything or not." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. On the third day, Coordinator Marsh called every senior member of both delegations into the same meeting room where he had first told us the truth about the border, and this time, his expression carried none of the careful warmth I had grown used to seeing on him. He looked exhausted, The way someone looks after carrying a decision alone for far too long and finally being forced to share its weight. "We have run every analysis available to us," he said, "human and Alliance data combined, and we still do not know what this object is, or what it wants, if it wants anything at all in a way we would recognize. What we do know is this: it absorbs energy directed at it rather than being harmed by it. It does not respond to communication attempts in any frequency or format either of our peoples have tried, and it is going to reach this station in 8 days. "What are our options?" Ambassador Kryn asked. Marsh looked toward Grace Feld, who had remained a quiet, steady presence throughout the joint sessions, offering her long memory whenever it proved useful. "There is one option my people have not yet used," Marsh said slowly, "the same capability that ended the faction 90 years ago. It remains available to us, held far from this border, out of the same restraint we have maintained for nearly a century. Using it here, against an unknown object we do not understand, carries no guarantee of success, and carries a very real risk of provoking a response we cannot predict." "But it remains an option," Kryn said. "It does," Marsh agreed, "and I will not pretend to you that some among my own people are not already arguing we should use it immediately, rather than risk this station and everyone in it. I understand that argument. I have spent 3 sleepless nights understanding that argument very deeply." He paused, looking around the table at the mixed gathering of human and Alliance officers, who had, only days before, been strangers separated by 90 years of silence and an empty space on a map. "But I did not call this delegation here only to ask you to watch us use that option again. I called you here because I believe, and I have believed since the moment that object changed course toward this border, that the answer this time should not be ours alone to decide, or to carry." Something shifted in the room at those words, a kind of quiet recognition passing between the delegates that I did not fully understand until Ambassador Kryn spoke again. "You are asking the Alliance to stand beside you," she said, "not as observers, as partners in whatever happens next." "I am," Marsh said simply. 90 years ago, we chose to face our mistake alone and to carry the silence that followed alone, because we believed that was the kindest thing we could do for a galaxy that had every reason to fear us. But this is not our mistake. This object crossed into a region we happened to be occupying. It could just as easily have entered your territory instead, and we would be sitting exactly where you are now, wondering what our neighbors intended to do about it without us." The room was quiet for a long moment. I found myself thinking of the old recording again, that tired, careful voice from 90 years ago. A door closed is not a door destroyed. I understood now, more fully than I had before, that a closed door could be reopened not only in fear, but in trust, and that trust, once offered, changed the shape of everything that followed it. "Then let us decide together," Kryn said finally, "what should be done." What followed was not the kind of dramatic confrontation I might once have imagined, back when I first stared at that empty curve on our galaxy map and let my imagination fill it with monsters. It was, instead, something quieter, and in its own way, far more remarkable. Human and Alliance scientists worked side by side around the clock, combining data neither side had ever shared with the other, searching not for a way to destroy the object, but for a way to understand it. It was Rel, of all people, who found the answer, 3 days before the object was set to reach Aldergate, buried in a pattern of energy absorption that nobody else had thought to compare against old Alliance survey records from decades earlier. "It's not hostile," he said, calling the joint team together with barely contained excitement. "Look at this pattern. It's the same signature our own deep survey drones use when mapping unfamiliar systems, just on a scale none of us have ever built before. It's not moving toward us to attack. It's moving toward us because we're the first populated region it's detected in what might be a very long journey. It's not a weapon, I think it's a map maker." The room fell into a stunned kind of silence, followed almost immediately by a wave of cautious, disbelieving relief. "You're certain?" Marsh asked. "Not certain," Rel admitted, but certain enough to suggest we try communication one more time, using a survey protocol instead of a diplomatic one. If I'm right, it might not be listening for a greeting, it might be listening for coordinates. Elena Voss and I worked through that final night alongside Rel, adapting our own oldest, simplest cartography signals into a format the object might recognize, a signal built not from words, but from the shared, patient language of distance and position that every star mapping species eventually learns for itself, human and Alliance alike. 2 days before the object reached Aldergate, we transmitted it, together, human systems and Alliance systems sending the same signal at the same moment for the first time in the history of either people. The response, when it came, arrived not as words, but as a shift in course, gentle and unmistakable, the vast, slow structure adjusting its path away from Aldergate entirely, curving instead toward the wide, empty dark beyond both our territories, continuing whatever patient, ancient survey it had been conducting long before either of our species had learned to build a single starship. I stood in the observation deck when it happened, beside Rel and Elena and Grace Feld, watching the object recede back into the darkness it had come from, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I had been carrying, without fully realizing it, since the first alarm had sounded aboard the Cathara nearly 2 weeks earlier. "It's leaving," Elena said quietly. "It's leaving," Rel agreed, and beside him, Grace Feld let out a slow breath that sounded, to my ears, like 90 years of carefully held tension finally beginning to unwind. Ambassador Kryn found me on the observation deck later that evening, after the celebrations had quieted and most of the joint teams had finally gone to rest. She stood beside me at the window, looking out at the stars that had, only days before, been entirely absent from every map I had ever studied. "You found the thread that started all of this," she said. "The old chart, the word withdrawn. I imagine you must feel some satisfaction, seeing where it led." "I feel something," I admitted, though I am not certain satisfaction is the right word for it. I think I feel grateful, and a little frightened, still, of how close we came to solving a mystery that had almost nothing to do with the real danger waiting behind it. Kryn considered that for a moment. "What will you do with what you've learned?" she asked, "when we return home?" It was a question I had been turning over in my own mind for days, ever since Grace Feld had first told her story around that table. Half of me understood exactly why the Alliance and the humans had kept this history so carefully quiet for 90 years, why forgetting had once seemed like the kindest, safest choice for everyone involved. But another part of me, the same stubborn part that had refused to walk away from an empty archive terminal, could not stop thinking about how close that silence had come to leaving both our peoples unprepared and alone when something far larger than either of us finally arrived. "I think," I said slowly, "that some doors are safer left closed, but I do not think this one should be. Not anymore, not entirely, perhaps not the whole story, not all at once, not in a way that turns fear into something worse. But I think our maps should show that something is there. I think future cartographers deserve to know there are neighbors at that border, rather than nothing at all." Kryn studied me for a long moment, and then, to my surprise, she smiled, small and genuine. "That," she said, "sounds like a very reasonable place to begin." 3 weeks later, aboard the Cathara, on my way back toward Alliance space with Ambassador Kryn's formal report secured in the ship's archive, I sat alone at my station and opened my own personal star chart, the private working copy every cartographer kept for their own study. I found the familiar, smooth, blank curve at the edge of the galaxy, the same empty space I had stared at 1,000 times without ever once questioning it. I did not fill in every system. I did not write out the whole difficult history Grace Feld had trusted me with, or the quiet, careful choice that had shaped 90 years of silence, or the vast patient traveler that had so nearly changed everything between our two peoples before it ever reached us. Some of that, I understood now, was not entirely mine to share. But I marked the border. I labeled it, simply, honestly, as home to a neighboring people, allies now in more than name, and I left a small note beside the marking, the kind of note future cartographers might find, the way I had found that single old word so many weeks before. Not empty, simply quiet, and worth understanding, rather than worth forgetting. I looked at that small addition for a long time before finally closing the chart, and outside the viewport, the stars that had once ended so abruptly at the edge of human space continued on, unbroken now, all the way to the horizon.